The howling wind threatened to steal Clara Nielsen's last breath as she staggered through knee-deep snow, her fingers numb and her hope dwindling with each painful step. The stagecoach had left her behind deliberately, she was certain, and now the December blizzard of 1885 seemed determined to claim her life as payment for her foolish trust in strangers. Clara had never imagined her journey west would end this way. 3 days ago, she'd been full of hope, traveling to Superior, Arizona Territory to take a position as the town's new school teacher. Now, she was just another fool about to die in the unforgiving western wilderness. Her trunk containing everything she owned had disappeared with the stagecoach, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back, a woefully inadequate traveling dress, petticoats, and a thin wool coat that might as well have been paper against the savage wind. The snow had started falling that morning, a gentle dusting that had seemed almost magical. By afternoon, it had transformed into this howling monster of a storm. "Help," Clara called, her voice immediately swallowed by the wind. "Someone, please," she knew no one could hear her. The nearest town was at least 10 miles away, and she had no idea which direction to go. The stagecoach driver had mentioned they were passing through a mountain pass when they'd stopped to fix a wheel. That's when they'd abandoned her, claiming they needed to lighten the load. She'd stepped down to stretch her legs, and they'd whipped the horses into motion, leaving her behind despite her screams and pleas. The snow was falling so thickly now that Clara could barely see 3 feet ahead. Each step was agony, her thin boots soaked through, her toes screaming with cold. She'd read about people freezing to death, how eventually the pain gave way to a dangerous warmth and drowsiness. Already she could feel that drowsiness creeping in, tempting her to just sit down and rest for a moment. "No," she muttered through blue lips. "Keep moving." Clara had not come this far just to die in the snow. Back in Boston, she'd left behind a life of comfortable servitude as a governess to seek independence and adventure. Her parents had died years ago, leaving her alone in the world. The advertisement for a schoolteacher in the Arizona Territory had seemed like Providence a chance to build something for herself. The wind shifted, driving ice crystals against her face like tiny needles. Clara turned away from it, changing her direction slightly. She couldn't feel her feet anymore, which terrified her. How much longer could she keep going? The light was fading fast, and with darkness would come even more brutal cold. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Clara spotted something through the whiteout conditions, a dark shape looming ahead. Squinting against the snow, she realized it was some sort of shelter, an old, abandoned miner's cabin half buried in a snowdrift. "Thank God," she whispered, summoning her last reserves of strength to push forward. The cabin door hung from one hinge, creaking mournfully in the wind. Inside, it was nearly as cold as outside, but at least she was shielded from the direct onslaught of the storm. The single room contained a collapsed bed frame, a rusted stove, and little else. No wood, no blankets, nothing to warm herself with. Clara huddled in the corner furthest from the broken door, hugging her knees to her chest. She was so tired, so very tired. Despite knowing the danger, she could feel her eyelids growing heavy. If she could just rest for a minute. Miles away, Archer James pulled his hat lower against the blinding snow, squinting to keep sight of the trail. He shouldn't have stayed so long in town after delivering those cattle, but the promise of a warm meal and poker game had been too tempting. Now he was paying for that decision, fighting his way through the worst blizzard he'd seen in his 8 years in the Arizona Territory. His horse, Thunder, pressed forward steadily, though Archer could feel the animal's reluctance. "Not much further, boy," he reassured the stallion, though in truth, his small ranch was still a good 4 miles away. They might not make it before full dark, but Archer knew this land well enough to navigate even in these conditions. At 32, Archer had seen his share of deadly weather. After fighting in the war, and then spending years driving cattle across the frontier, he'd developed a respect for nature's power and an instinct for survival. Those instincts were screaming at him now to find shelter and wait out the worst of the storm. He was considering his options when Thunder suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward. "What is it, boy?" Archer patted the horse's neck, peering into the swirling white before them. Thunder snorted, pawing at the ground. Something had caught the animal's attention. Archer strained his eyes, then saw what had alerted his mount tracks in the snow, rapidly being covered by fresh powder. Human tracks, small and uneven, as if the person had been stumbling. Who in their right mind would be out in this? Archer muttered, dismounting to examine the trail more closely. The tracks were fresh, no more than an hour old. From their size, they appeared to belong to a woman or perhaps a youth. Whoever had made them was traveling alone and on foot, a death sentence in these conditions. Archer didn't hesitate. He swung back into the saddle and urged Thunder to follow the tracks. His own shelter could wait. Someone needed help more urgently. The trail wound erratically through the snow, sometimes doubling back as if the traveler had become disoriented. Archer followed doggedly, knowing that time was running out. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the fading light, and no one could survive long in these conditions without proper gear. After 20 minutes of careful tracking, Archer spotted something in the distance, a dilapidated cabin he recognized from his hunting trips. Old Man Fletcher's place, abandoned years ago when the Silver Vein ran dry. The tracks led directly to it. Approaching cautiously, Archer called out, "Hello." Anyone in there? The only response was the howling wind. Dismounting and securing Thunder to a sheltered spot beside the cabin, Archer approached the crooked door, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. While he expected to find someone in trouble, frontier life had taught him to be prepared for anything. "Hello," he called again, pushing the door open wider. At first he thought the cabin was empty. Then his eyes adjusted to the gloom and he spotted a huddled form in the corner. A woman curled into a tight ball, her skin frighteningly pale, her lips blue with cold. "Madam?" Archer crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling beside her. "Madam, can you hear me?" The woman's eyelids fluttered. She was alive, but barely. Hypothermia had clearly set in. Without immediate warmth, she wouldn't survive the night. "My name's Archer James," he said, removing his gloves to feel her pulse. It was weak and slow. "I'm going to help you, madam." Her eyes opened fully then, revealing irises the color of summer sky. "Am I dead?" she whispered. "Not yet, and not today if I have anything to say about it," Archer replied, already shrugging off his heavy buffalo coat to wrap around her. "What's your name?" "Clara," she managed, her teeth chattering violently. "Clara Nielsen." "Well, Miss Nielsen, we need to get you warmed up and fast." "Can you stand?" Clara tried to nod, but her body seemed beyond her control. Archer didn't waste time asking again. He scooped her up, alarmed at how little she weighed, and carried her outside to Thunder. "My ranch isn't far," he explained as he settled her in the saddle before mounting behind her. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry." Clara didn't respond. She had slipped back into semi-consciousness, her body slumping against his chest. Archer wrapped one arm securely around her waist and took the reins with his other hand. "Let's go, Thunder. Fast as you can, boy." The journey seemed endless. Archer continually spoke to Clara, trying to keep her awake, telling her about his ranch, his horse, anything to maintain that tenuous connection to consciousness. Occasionally, she would respond with a faint murmur, but mostly she remained silent, her breathing shallow. By the time they reached his homestead, darkness had fallen completely, and the temperature had plummeted further. The small, sturdy log cabin appeared through the snow like a beacon of hope, smoke still rising from the chimney where banked coals awaited his return. Archer dismounted carefully, pulling Clara down into his arms. "We're here," he said, carrying her toward the door. "Stay with me, Clara." Inside, he quickly laid her on his bed and stoked the fire to blazing. The cabin was simple but solid, one main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and his sleeping space partially sectioned off by a rough wooden screen. It wasn't much, but right now it was a palace compared to that abandoned miner's shack. Clara's clothing was soaked through and freezing. Archer knew what needed to be done, but hesitated. He was a gentleman, despite his rough exterior, and the thought of undressing an unconscious woman went against everything he believed in. Yet leaving her in those wet clothes would kill her. "Miss Nielsen," he said loudly, hoping to rouse her. "Clara, your clothes are wet. They need to come off or you'll never warm up. Do you understand?" Her eyes fluttered open briefly, a flicker of comprehension crossing her face before she nodded weakly. Working as quickly and respectfully as possible, Archer removed her outer garments, averting his eyes as much as the task allowed. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then set a pot of water to heat on the stove. While waiting for the water to boil, he quickly went out to tend to Thunder, removing the horse's tack and making sure he had hay and unfrozen water. By the time he returned, Clara was shivering violently, a good sign, actually. Her body was fighting back against the cold. Archer prepared a hot drink of coffee with a splash of whiskey and honey. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he lifted her head gently. "Try to drink this," he urged. "It'll warm you from the inside." Clara managed a few sips before turning her head away. "The stagecoach," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "They left me, deliberately left me." Anger flared in Archer's chest. "The stagecoach abandoned you in a blizzard. Who was driving?" "Don't know his name," Clara whispered. "Heavy man, red beard, said I, made the coach too heavy." "Needed to lighten the load." Archer recognized the description. Silas Mercer, who ran the stage line from Phoenix to Superior. A mean, penny-pinching bastard known for cutting corners and overloading his coaches. The idea that he'd abandoned a young woman to die in a blizzard to lighten the load made Archer's blood boil. "You're safe now," he said, pushing aside his anger for the moment. "Rest. We'll figure everything out once you're stronger." Clara's eyes closed again, exhaustion overtaking her. Archer settled into his chair by the fire, prepared for a long night of vigilance. He would need to check on her regularly, make sure her temperature was rising, not falling. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside his small cabin, he had created a sanctuary from the storm. As the night progressed, Archer found himself studying Clara Nielsen's face in the firelight. Despite the pallor of cold, he could see she was a handsome woman, probably in her mid-20s, with delicate features and chestnut-brown hair that had come loose from its pins to fan across his pillow. What had brought her to this remote part of the Arizona territory, traveling alone? Women didn't generally venture into these parts without family or a husband, especially not in winter. Around midnight, Clara's fever broke. She began to thrash in the bed, murmuring incoherently. Archer placed a cool cloth on her forehead, speaking softly to calm her. "You're safe, Clara. You're at my ranch. The storm can't hurt you here." Her eyes opened, clearer now but confused. "Who are you? Where am I?" "Name's Archer James. Found you half frozen in Fletcher's old cabin. This is my place, about 4 miles south of Superior." Clara tried to sit up, then realized her state of undress beneath the blankets. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Your clothes were soaked through," Archer explained quickly, turning away to give her privacy. "They're drying by the fire. I have a spare shirt you can wear until then." He retrieved a clean flannel shirt from his trunk and handed it to her without looking. "I'll step outside while you change. Call when you're decent." Archer waited on the porch, the cold biting through his clothing. Without his buffalo coat, which was still wrapped around Clara along with his blankets, the full force of the winter night assaulted him. Still, the discomfort was worth knowing she was recovering. He'd seen too many good people claimed by the harsh realities of frontier life. Finding her tracks had been providence, and he wasn't about to let that gift go to waste. "I'm presentable," Clara called weakly after a few minutes. Archer returned to find her sitting up in bed, his shirt hanging loosely on her slender frame. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and she was no longer shivering uncontrollably. "Progress. How are you feeling?" he asked, pouring her another cup of the warm coffee mixture. "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," she admitted with a weak smile, accepting the drink. "But alive, thanks to you." "What happened, Miss Nielsen? How did you end up alone in that blizzard?" Clara took a sip of the coffee, grimacing slightly at the taste of whiskey but drinking it nonetheless. "I was traveling to Superior to take a position as the new school teacher. The stagecoach had mechanical troubles about 10 miles out of town. While the driver and guard were working on it, they suggested the passengers step out to lighten the load. When I was off the coach, they suddenly whipped the horses and took off." Her voice broke slightly. "My trunk with all my belongings was still aboard. They just left me there." Archer's jaw tightened. "That's not just cruel, it's criminal. I tried to follow the road, but the snow covered it so quickly. I became disoriented." She looked down at her hands, which still bore the redness of cold. "If you hadn't found me." "But I did," Archer said firmly, "and once this storm passes, we'll get you to Superior and sort everything out. Silas Mercer has some explaining to do." Clara nodded, though uncertainty clouded her eyes. "My position. I was supposed to start tomorrow. The school board will think I've abandoned the job. They'll understand once they hear what happened. Superior's not a big town, but folks there are decent." Archer hesitated, then added, "And if they don't understand, well, you can stay here until we figure something else out." Clara looked up sharply, surprise evident on her face. "That's very kind, Mr. James, but I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," he interrupted gently. "And call me Archer. Anyone who survived what you have today has earned the right to use my given name." A small smile touched Clara's lips. "Then you must call me Clara, and thank you truly." The rest of the night passed more peacefully. Clara drifted in and out of sleep while Archer maintained the fire and occasionally checked on Thunder. By dawn, the worst of the storm had passed, though a steady snow continued to fall. Clara's clothes had dried, and Archer discreetly returned them before preparing a simple breakfast of bacon, beans, and biscuits. "You're quite the cook," Clara remarked, eating with surprising appetite for someone who had nearly frozen to death the day before. Archer shrugged. 8 years on your own teaches you a few things. Nothing fancy, but it keeps body and soul together. You've lived here 8 years, alone. Came out after the war, needed space and quiet after all that." Archer didn't elaborate on his experiences during the conflict. Some memories were best left undisturbed. Started with nothing but thunder and a bedroll, built this place log by log. Clara looked around the cabin with new appreciation. Though simple, it was solid and well-crafted, with small touches that spoke of care. Shelves of books, a hand-carved chest set on a small table, curtains at the windows. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "A true home." Something warm unfurled in Archer's chest at her words. He'd never thought of his cabin as particularly special, but seeing it through Clara's eyes made him realize he had indeed created something worthwhile here. "The storm's letting up," he observed, glancing out the window. "If you're feeling strong enough, we should try to reach Superior today. The town will be concerned about their new teacher." Clara nodded, though Archer thought he detected a flicker of reluctance. "Of course, I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "It's no imposition," he assured her again. "But you came all this way for that position, and I'd hate to see you lose it because of Mercer's cruelty." While Clara dressed behind the privacy screen, Archer prepared Thunder for the journey. The snow had accumulated to nearly 2 feet in some places, but the stallion was strong and sure-footed. It would be slow going, but they could reach Superior by mid-afternoon if they started soon. Clara emerged from the cabin, wearing her now dry traveling dress and coat. Already she looked more like the proper Eastern lady she was, though the ordeal had left its mark in the shadows beneath her eyes and a new wariness in her expression. "I've been thinking," Archer said as he helped her mount Thunder. "Once we get to Superior, you should see the sheriff immediately." What Mercer did was criminal endangerment at the very least. Clara settled herself on the saddle, arranging her skirts as best she could. "Will it make a difference? From what I understand, the law can be selective out here." Archer swung up behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite the close quarters. "Sheriff Wilson's a good man, fair. He won't take kindly to Mercer leaving a woman to die, no matter what excuses that scoundrel comes up with." The journey to Superior was slow but steady. The snow-covered landscape stretched out around them, pristine and beautiful now that the storm had passed. Clara seemed to regain more of her strength with each mile, sitting straighter in the saddle, and even pointing out wildlife tracks they passed. "You know quite a bit about nature for an Easterner," Archer observed after she correctly identified rabbit tracks crossing their path. "My father was a naturalist," Clara explained, a note of pride in her voice. "He took me on his expeditions whenever my mother would allow it. Before he passed, we had cataloged nearly every species of bird in Massachusetts." "I'm sorry about your father," Archer said quietly. "It was many years ago. Both my parents are gone now." Her voice remained steady, but Archer could hear the undercurrent of loss. "That's partly why I came west." There was nothing keeping me in Boston except memories. Archer understood that sentiment all too well. Fresh starts are what the West was made for, he said, though perhaps not quite as fresh as nearly freezing to death. Clara's laugh was unexpected and musical, lighting up her face in a way that made Archer's heart skip a beat. Indeed not, but I suppose it makes for a memorable beginning to my Western adventure. As they crested a small rise, the town of Superior came into view in the valley below. It wasn't much a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest, scattered houses and shops spreading outward, but compared to the emptiness they'd traveled through, it appeared almost bustling. "There it is," Archer said, "your new home." Clara was silent for a long moment, studying the town. "It looks peaceful. It is mostly mining town originally, but it's settled down in recent years. Good folks by and large." They rode down into Superior, attracting curious glances from townsfolk clearing snow from their doorways or trudging along the boardwalks. Archer guided Thunder directly to the sheriff's office, a small building with a wooden star hanging above the door. Sheriff Wilson looked up from his desk as they entered, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Archer. "James, thought you might have gotten caught in that blizzard." His gaze shifted to Clara, curiosity evident. "And who might this be?" "Clara Nielsen," Archer said, helping her to a chair. "She's the new schoolteacher, or was supposed to be. Silas Mercer abandoned her in the past during the storm yesterday, left her to die to lighten his load." Wilson's expression darkened. "Is that right, Miss Nielsen?" Clara nodded, recounting her ordeal while the sheriff took notes, his face growing increasingly grim. "Mercer's been cutting corners for years," Wilson said when she'd finished. "But this is beyond the pale. You're lucky to be alive, madam." "I know," Clara said quietly. "If Mr. James hadn't found my tracks." "Mercer's stage is due back through here tomorrow," Wilson said, standing. "I'll have a word with him, more than a word. In the meantime, Miss Nielsen, we should get you settled. The school board's been anxious about your arrival." A look of concern crossed Clara's face. "My belongings. All my teaching materials were in my trunk on that stagecoach. We'll get them back," Wilson assured her. "Mercer will have some explaining to do when he rolls into town." Wilson escorted them to a small building near the church that served as both the town hall and meeting place for the school board. Inside, they found 3 people engaged in heated discussion: a portly man with mutton chop sideburns, a severe-looking woman in her 50s, and a younger man with spectacles and an anxious expression. "Mayor Phillips," Wilson called, interrupting their debate. "Miss Nielsen has arrived." All 3 turned, surprise evident on their faces. "Miss Nielsen," the mayor hurried forward, hand extended. "We feared the worst when you didn't arrive on yesterday's stage. Mercer claimed you decided not to come at the last minute." Clara's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Mercer lied. He abandoned me in the mountain pass during the blizzard. If not for Mr. James here, I would have perished." The severity of her statement stunned the room into silence. Then all 3 board members began speaking at once, expressing outrage and concern. The older woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Abernathy, immediately took Clara under her wing, insisting she needed rest and proper care after such an ordeal. "You'll stay with me until you're recovered," Mrs. Abernathy declared. "I have a spare room that's quite comfortable." "That's very kind," Clara began, "but what about the school? I was meant to start teaching tomorrow." "Nonsense," Mayor Phillips interjected. "After what you've been through, you need at least a few days to recuperate. School can wait until Monday next." Archer, who had remained by the door during these exchanges, now stepped forward. "If you'll excuse me, I should be getting back to my ranch." Clara turned to him, something unspoken in her eyes. "Mr. James, I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed, Miss Nielsen." Archer tipped his hat. "Just glad you're safe now." "At least let us compensate you for your trouble," Mayor Phillips offered. Archer shook his head firmly. "It wasn't trouble. Any decent man would have done the same." He looked at Clara one last time. "Good luck with your teaching, Miss Nielsen. Superior's children will be fortunate to have you." With that, he departed, leaving Clara surrounded by her new colleagues. As he mounted Thunder for the ride home, Archer couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something important behind. Ridiculous, of course. Clara Nielsen was safe now, about to begin the new life she'd traveled so far to find. Their paths had crossed by chance, nothing more. Yet as he rode back into the wilderness, Archer found himself wondering if he might find some reason to visit Superior more regularly in the coming weeks. The next morning brought clear skies and a town buzzing with gossip about the new schoolteacher's dramatic arrival. Clara, settled in Mrs. Abernathy's comfortable spare room, spent the day recovering her strength and meeting various townsfolk who came calling to introduce themselves and offer assistance. News of her ordeal had spread quickly, earning her both sympathy and immediate respect from the community. "You must think us terribly provincial after Boston," Mrs. Abernathy remarked as she poured tea during a brief lull in visitors. "Not at all," Clara assured her. "Everyone has been incredibly kind. Well, what Mercer did has the whole town in an uproar. Sheriff Wilson's waiting at the stage depot now. That scoundrel is due in on the afternoon coach." Clara hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind since waking. "Has Mr. James been to town today?" Mrs. Abernathy gave her a knowing look over her spectacles. "Archer." "No, he rarely comes to town except for supplies once a month or so, keeps to himself mostly." She studied Clara's face. "He saved your life. That creates a bond, whether you realize it or not." Clara felt heat rising to her cheeks. "He was very kind." "Kind isn't a word most folks would use for Archer James," Mrs. Abernathy said with a slight smile. "Honorable, yes, trustworthy, certainly, but he's not known for warmth. The war changed him, they say. He was just a boy when he went to fight, came back a man with shadows in his eyes." Before Clara could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention. Looking through the window, they saw a crowd gathering at the stage depot down the street. "Mercer's arrived," Mrs. Abernathy said grimly, "and it appears Sheriff Wilson is making good on his promise." Clara rose, drawn to the window. Even from this distance, she could see Sheriff Wilson confronting a heavyset man with a red beard seal as Mercer. The driver was gesticulating wildly, his face nearly as red as his beard. "Perhaps we should go down there," Clara suggested, reaching for her coat. "I want to retrieve my trunk if it's still on the coach." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approval. "Yes, I think that would be appropriate. Besides, Mercer deserves to face the woman he left to die." By the time they reached the depot, a sizable crowd had gathered. Sheriff Wilson had Mercer backed against the stagecoach, one hand resting meaningfully on his holstered revolver. "I'm telling you," she asked to be let off. Mercer was insisting. Said she changed her mind about teaching here, in the middle of nowhere, during a blizzard. Wilson's voice dripped with skepticism. "That's the poorest excuse for attempted murder I've ever heard." The crowd parted as Clara approached, murmurs spreading as people recognized her. Mercer's face went from red to ashen when he spotted her. "You're alive," he stammered. "No thanks to you," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the anger coursing through her. "Where are my belongings, Mr. Mercer?" Mercer's eyes darted nervously around the crowd, then back to the sheriff. "Look, there was a misunderstanding. The storm was coming on fast. We had to make time. You abandoned me to die," Clara interrupted, her voice carrying clearly to the assembled onlookers. "You took my money for passage to Superior, then left me in a blizzard without shelter or supplies." A new voice cut through the tension. "And that's why you're under arrest, Mercer." Clara turned to see Archer James pushing through the crowd, leading thunder. He looked as if he'd ridden hard to get there, his expression grim but determined. "James," Sheriff Wilson acknowledged with a nod. "Didn't expect to see you back in town so soon. Heard Mercer's stage was due in." Archer's gaze remained fixed on the stagecoach driver. "Thought I should be here to make sure justice is served." Mercer's bluster collapsed entirely at the sight of Archer. "Now look here, I was just doing my job." "That pass gets treacherous in snow. All the more reason not to leave a woman alone there," Archer cut in, his voice dangerously soft. "Where's her trunk?" Under the combined pressure of the sheriff, Archer, and the disapproving crowd, Mercer finally cracked. It's in the luggage compartment. I was going to turn it over to the school board, explain that she changed her mind about the position." "Get it down," Wilson ordered. "Now." As Mercer scrambled to comply, Archer moved to Clara's side. "I thought you might want this back," he said quietly, holding out a small leather-bound book. Found it in the snow near where I picked up your trail. Figured it might be important. Clara took the book with trembling hands, her father's journal, which she had been carrying in her coat pocket. She'd assumed it lost forever. How did you know to look for it? A faint smile touched Archer's lips. Saw something dark against the snow on my way back to the ranch. Pure luck. Thank you, Clara whispered, clutching the journal to her chest. This means more than I can say. Their moment was interrupted by Mercer hauling her trunk down from the coach. The sheriff immediately took custody of it, instructing 2 young men from the crowd to carry it to Mrs. Abernathy's house. As for you, Mercer, Wilson said, producing a pair of handcuffs, you're spending some time in my jail while I decide exactly what charges to file. You can't do this, Mercer protested as the cuffs were snapped around his wrists. The stage line won't run without me. I reckon the passengers would be safer if it didn't run at all, Archer commented dryly, earning murmurs of agreement from the crowd. As Wilson led Mercer away, Mayor Phillips stepped forward to address the gathering. Folks, I believe we've all had enough excitement for one day. Miss Nielsen has been through a terrible ordeal and needs her rest. The crowd began to disperse, though many people paused to offer Clara words of support or welcome. Through it all, Archer remained quietly at her side, a steadying presence amidst the chaos. You didn't need to come all the way back to town, Clara said when they finally had a moment alone. Archer shrugged. Wanted to make sure Mercer faced consequences. Men like that don't change unless forced to. Clara studied his face, noting the determination in his blue-gray eyes. You rode all this way for justice on my behalf. Justice benefits everyone, he replied, though there was something in his expression that suggested more personal motivations. Besides, I needed supplies anyway. Clara wasn't entirely convinced by this explanation, but she didn't press. Well, I'm grateful regardless, for everything. Archer shifted uncomfortably under her earnest gaze. I should let you get back to Mrs. Abernathy's. You're still recovering, will you? Will you be staying in town tonight? The question seemed to surprise him. Hadn't planned on it. Why, Mrs. Abernathy mentioned that the town is holding a small welcome dinner for me this evening at the hotel. I thought perhaps you might attend. Clara felt a flutter of nervousness as she made the invitation. After all, without you, there would be no one to welcome. Archer hesitated, clearly torn. I'm not much for social gatherings, Miss Nielsen, Clara, she reminded him gently. And I understand, but it would mean a great deal to have a friend there. Something softened in Archer's expression. A friend, is it? Well, I suppose I could stay for one dinner. Clara's smile was radiant. Wonderful. It's at 7 o'clock. As Archer led Thunder toward the livery stable to be tended while he remained in town, he found himself wondering what had possessed him to accept the invitation. He avoided town gatherings as a rule, preferring the solitude of his ranch to the often suffocating sociability of Superior's residents. Yet something about Clara Nielsen made the prospect of an evening of small talk seem almost appealing. The welcome dinner turned out to be larger than Clara had been led to expect. Nearly half the town crammed into the hotel dining room, all eager to meet the new schoolteacher and hear first in the story of her rescue. Clara, dressed in her one remaining good dress recovered from her trunk, found herself the center of attention, a position that both flattered and overwhelmed her. Archer arrived precisely at 7, having made an effort with his appearance. He'd trimmed his beard, slicked back his dark hair, and donned a clean white shirt beneath his best vest. Several heads turned when he entered, surprise evident on many faces. Mr. James at a social gathering, Mrs. Abernathy remarked with a raised eyebrow as he approached their table. I believe this is what they call a rare sighting. Archer inclined his head politely. Mrs. Abernathy, Miss Nielsen invited me, and I'm very glad you came, Clara said warmly, indicating the empty chair beside her. Please join us. Throughout dinner, Clara couldn't help noticing how the townspeople regarded Archer with respect, certainly, but also a degree of wariness, as if unsure how to interact with him. For his part, Archer spoke little, answering direct questions politely but offering nothing more. Yet whenever Clara glanced his way, she found his attention firmly fixed on her, his expression attentive and, she thought, perhaps even admiring. After the meal, Mayor Phillips called for attention and raised a toast to Clara. To our new school teacher, who has already demonstrated remarkable fortitude in the face of adversity. Superior is fortunate to have you, Miss Nielsen. Glasses were raised all around, and Clara felt a swell of emotion. Despite the harrowing beginning, she was starting to believe she might truly find a home here. And, the mayor continued, we must also recognize Mr. James, without whom we would be mourning a tragedy rather than celebrating an arrival. To Archer James, a man of few words but decisive action. This toast was met with equally enthusiastic response. Archer, looking decidedly uncomfortable with the attention, merely nodded his acknowledgement. As the evening progressed, Clara found herself drawn into conversation after conversation with her new neighbors, each eager to tell her about their children who would soon be her pupils, or to offer assistance with setting up the schoolhouse. Through it all, she maintained a keen awareness of Archer's presence, even as he gradually retreated to a quieter corner of the room. When she finally managed to extricate herself from a particularly chatty mother of four, Clara sought him out, finding him by the window, gazing out at the now starlit night. "Are you planning your escape?" she asked lightly. Archer turned, a small smile touching his lips. "That obvious, is it?" "Only to someone who's been watching," Clara admitted, then flushed slightly at the implication. "It's been a long time since I attended something like this," Archer said, gesturing to the crowded room. "Not since before the war, I think." Clara moved to stand beside him at the window. "Thank you for coming. It meant a great deal to have you here. It's good to see you welcomed properly," Archer replied. "These are good people by and large. They'll look after you. And will you be one of them?" The question slipped out before Clara could consider its implications. Archer looked at her curiously. "One of what? The people looking after me," Clara clarified, though she knew that wasn't precisely what she'd meant. "I reckon you won't need much looking after, Miss Nielsen. You've got more grit than most men I've known." His voice held genuine admiration. "But if you ever need help, you know where to find me." Clara felt a curious warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I do, though your ranch seems quite far from town for regular visits." 4 miles isn't so far," Archer said. "Less than 2 hours on horseback, less if you ride well." "I've never ridden alone," Clara admitted. "My father always led the horse when we went on his expeditions." A thoughtful expression crossed Archer's face. "Perhaps that's something I could teach you if you've a mind to learn. Useful skill out here." Clara brightened at the suggestion. "I would like that very much." "Then it's settled. Once you're fully recovered and settled into your teaching duties, send word. I'll come by with a gentle mare I've been training, perfect for a beginner." The prospect of seeing Archer again, of having a reason for continued connection, filled Clara with unexpected happiness. "I'll hold you to that promise, Mr. James." "Archer," he reminded her, his expression softening in a way that made Clara's heart beat faster. "Archer," she echoed, the name feeling right on her lips. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity as Clara settled into her role as superior schoolteacher. The one-room schoolhouse required considerable cleaning and organization, but eager volunteers from town made the work go quickly. By the time classes began, Clara had transformed the dusty space into a warm, inviting environment for learning, complete with maps, books, and even a small collection of natural specimens reminiscent of her father's work. Her 28 pupils ranged in age from 6 to 16. A diverse group including the children of miners, merchants, ranchers, and even a few from the nearby Apache reservation, whose parents valued the opportunity for education. Clara approached the challenge with enthusiasm, developing a curriculum that respected the different backgrounds and needs of her students. Throughout these busy days, her thoughts often turned to Archer James. True to his word, he had remained scarce, allowing her the space to establish herself in the community. Yet Clara found herself watching the trail leading out of town, hoping to glimpse his familiar figure on horseback. "You're mooning again, Miss Nielsen, Mrs." Abernathy observed one Saturday afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas. Clara startled. "I beg your pardon. Every time you look toward the North Trail, you get that wistful expression." The older woman's tone was knowing rather than accusatory. "It's been nearly 3 weeks since the welcome dinner. Perhaps it's time you sent word to Mr. James about those riding lessons he promised. Clara felt heat rising to her cheeks. I've been very busy with the school and doing a magnificent job, Mrs. Abernathy interrupted. The children adore you, the parents sing your praises, you've earned a day of recreation. Clara hesitated, then admitted, I wouldn't know how to contact him. Billy Jenkins rides out that way delivering mail twice a week. He'd be happy to carry a note. Mrs. Abernathy smiled encouragingly. Sunday would be the perfect day for a riding lesson. No school and the weather has been fine. The idea was tempting. Clara had established herself professionally, earned the respect of the community, and fully recovered from her ordeal. There was no reason not to take Archer up on his offer except for the confusing flutter of emotions she experienced whenever she thought of him. I'll consider it, she said finally, returning her attention to the peas. See that you do, Mrs. Abernathy replied with satisfaction. Otherwise, I may be forced to send the note myself. The next morning, Clara rose early and penned a brief message to Archer, reminding him of his offer to teach her to ride and suggesting that Sunday would be convenient if he was available. She gave the sealed note to Billy Jenkins, the young mail carrier who promised to deliver it that very day. Mr. James gets hardly any mail, Billy informed her cheerfully. He'll probably be real pleased to hear from you, Miss Nielsen. Clara spent the remainder of the day in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between excitement at the prospect of seeing Archer again and anxiety that he might have forgotten his offer or changed his mind. By nightfall, no reply had come, and Clara retired to bed trying to convince herself she wasn't disappointed. Sunday dawned clear and mild, a perfect early spring day. Clara breakfasted with Mrs. Abernathy, then settled on the porch with a book of poetry, determined to enjoy the day regardless of whether Archer appeared. She had just turned the page when the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Looking up, Clara saw Archer approaching, leading a second horse, a pretty chestnut mare with a white blaze down her nose. Good morning, Miss Nielsen, he called as he drew nearer. I hope this isn't too early for that riding lesson. Clara stood quickly, nearly dropping her book in her haste. Not at all, I hadn't received a reply to my note, so I wasn't certain you would come. Archer dismounted, leading both horses to the hitching post. Figured there wasn't much point riding back when I could just show up. Billy said you suggested today. Now that he was closer, Clara could see that Archer looked different, somehow more rested, his clothing newer and his hair trimmed neatly beneath his hat. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, just as he had for the welcome dinner. I'm glad you came, Clara said honestly. Let me just change into something more suitable for riding. When she emerged from the house a few minutes later, she had exchanged her Sunday dress for a practical skirt and blouse borrowed from Mrs. Abernathy's niece. Archer was adjusting the stirrups on the chestnut mare, but he turned at her approach, his expression warming. This is Penny, he said, patting the mare's neck. Gentlest horse I've ever trained, perfect for a beginner. Clara approached cautiously, extending her hand to let the mare sniff her. She's beautiful. She is, Archer agreed, though Clara caught him looking at her rather than the horse as he said it. The riding lesson began in Mrs. Abernathy's large backyard, with Archer patiently teaching Clara the basics of mounting, holding the reins, and maintaining her balance. His instructions were clear and his manner encouraging, never making her feel foolish when she made mistakes. You're a natural, he told her after she successfully guided Penny in a small circle without assistance. You're an excellent teacher, Clara countered with a smile. Though I suspect you're being overly generous with your praise. Never been one for empty flattery, Archer assured her. You've got good instincts and you're not afraid. That's half the battle with riding. After an hour of practice, Archer suggested they venture beyond the yard. There's a nice flat trail that follows the creek. Good terrain for a new rider. What do you say? Clara nodded eagerly. I'd like that. They rode side by side where the trail allowed, with Archer slightly ahead on narrower sections. Clara found that her initial nervousness faded as she grew accustomed to Penny's gentle rhythm and the sensation of moving in tandem with the animal. How are your students doing? Archer asked as they followed the meandering creek. Wonderfully, Clara replied, pleased by his interest. They're bright and eager to learn for the most part. Even the older boys, who I was warned might be resistant, have shown real aptitude. Not surprising, you have a way of drawing people in. Archer's comments seemed to surprise even himself, and he quickly added, to learning, I mean. Clara smiled at his awkwardness. Thank you. I find I'm learning as much from them as they are from me, especially about life here in the West. It's so different from Boston. Better or worse? Clara considered the question. Different. There's a directness here, a lack of pretense that's refreshing after Boston society. But I do miss certain refinements: libraries, museums, concerts. Must be quite a change, Archer observed. Do you regret coming? Not for a moment, Clara said firmly, even considering my dramatic arrival. They had reached a lovely spot where the creek widened into a small pool, shaded by cottonwood trees. Archer suggested they stop to rest and water the horses. He helped Clara dismount, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Seated on a fallen log beside the pool, they shared the lunch Mrs. Abernathy had packed: fried chicken, biscuits, and apple tarts. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on Clara's teaching, Archer's ranching, and life in Superior. Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you fought in the war, Clara said during a lull in the conversation. You must have been very young. A shadow crossed Archer's face. 16 when I enlisted. Lied about my age, but they didn't look too closely. They needed soldiers. That's so young, Clara said softly. Just a boy. Wasn't a boy for long, Archer replied, his voice distant. War has a way of aging you fast. Clara hesitated, then placed her hand gently on his arm. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring up painful memories. Archer looked down at her hand, then covered it with his own. It's all right, been over 20 years now, just don't talk about it much. You don't need to, Clara assured him. Not unless you want to. He met her eyes then, something vulnerable and grateful in his gaze. Thank you for that. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Clara became acutely aware of the warmth of his hand over hers, the sound of the creek bubbling nearby, the dappled sunlight playing across his features. Finally, Archer cleared his throat and stood. We should head back. Don't want to overtire you on your first proper ride. The return journey was quieter, both of them seemingly lost in thought. As they approached Mrs. Abernathy's house, Clara found herself wishing the day didn't have to end. Would you like to stay for dinner? She asked impulsively as Archer helped her dismount. Mrs. Abernathy always prepares more than enough. Archer hesitated, then shook his head regretfully. Better get back before dark, got animals to tend to. Clara tried not to show her disappointment. Of course, I understand. But he added, if you're interested in continuing these lessons, I could come back next Sunday. Clara brightened immediately. I would like that very much. Then it's settled. Archer mounted thunder, tipping his hat. You did well today, Clara. You'll be riding like a native in no time. As he rode away, leading Penny behind him, Clara felt a curious mixture of contentment and anticipation. There was something developing between them, something beyond friendship, though neither had acknowledged it openly. The prospect both thrilled and frightened her. Mrs. Abernathy was waiting on the porch, a knowing smile on her face. Enjoy your lesson, did you? Very much, Clara admitted, unable to suppress her own smile. Archer's an excellent teacher. Archer, is it? Mrs. Abernathy raised an eyebrow. My, how formal barriers fall when one spends a day in the wilderness. Clara felt her cheeks warm. It's nothing improper. Did I suggest it was? The older woman chuckled. Though I will say, in all the years Archer James has lived near Superior, I've never known him to offer riding lessons before. The riding lessons became a Sunday tradition over the next month. Each week, Archer would arrive with Penny in tow, and he and Clara would explore a different trail around Superior. Clara's confidence on horseback grew rapidly, and soon they were venturing further afield, discovering hidden valleys, stunning vistas, and secluded waterfalls that few townsfolk ever visited. During these rides, the barriers between them gradually lowered. Archer spoke more freely of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his experiences during and after the war, his journey west seeking solitude and purpose. Clara, in turn, shared stories of her life in Boston, her father's scientific work, and her dreams for the future. What neither discussed explicitly was the growing attachment between them. It manifested in small ways: lingering glances, hands brushing while sharing a canteen, sitting closer together during their rest stops. The people of Superior noticed, of course. Small towns thrived on such observations, and speculation about the blossoming relationship between the reserved rancher and the refined schoolteacher became a favorite topic of gossip. "They're saying in town that Mr. James has his eye on you," one of Clara's older students, Abigail Peterson, informed her frankly one day after class. "That's hardly appropriate discussion for school, Abigail," Clara replied, fighting to maintain her professional composure. "My ma says it's romantic," Abigail continued undeterred. "Like something from a novel, him rescuing you from the blizzard and all." Clara shooed the girl on her way, but the comment lingered in her mind. Was that how others saw them? As characters in some frontier romance? The thought was both embarrassing and oddly pleasing. By early June, Clara had become proficient enough on horseback that Archer suggested a longer excursion. "There's a place about 2 hours' ride from here," he explained after their usual Sunday ride. "A hidden canyon with walls the color of fire when the sun hits them right. Thought you might like to see it." "That sounds wonderful," Clara replied eagerly. "When?" "Would need a full day," Archer said. "This coming Saturday, perhaps, if you can get away from your school preparations." Clara didn't hesitate. Saturday would be perfect. The proposed outing represented a shift in their relationship, a planned excursion rather than a lesson, a full day spent together away from the curious eyes of Superior. Clara found herself counting the days until Saturday with growing anticipation. When the day arrived, Archer appeared at Mrs. Abernathy's house just after dawn, leading Penny and Thunder. Clara was ready, having packed a substantial lunch and dressed in her most practical riding clothes. Mrs. Abernathy saw them off with a knowing smile, but mercifully, no teasing remarks. The early morning ride was magical, with mist still clinging to the valleys and the rising sun gilding the landscape. They rode mostly in comfortable silence, Clara marveling at how natural it felt to be traveling alongside Archer, as if they had been doing so for years rather than weeks. "We turn here," Archer said after about 2 hours, guiding Thunder toward what appeared to be a solid wall of rock and scrub brush. "It's hidden unless you know exactly where to look." Clara followed, intrigued, as he led them through a narrow, twisting passage between two rock formations. The passage opened suddenly into a spectacular hidden canyon, just as Archer had described. Sheer walls of red sandstone rose on 3 sides, streaked with gold and amber where the sunlight touched them. A small waterfall trickled down one wall, feeding a clear pool below. Wildflowers dotted the canyon floor, adding splashes of color to the already breathtaking scene. "Archer," Clara breathed, reining Penny to a stop. "It's magnificent." Archer's expression was one of quiet pleasure at her reaction. "Found it by accident my first year here. Been coming back ever since when I need to think or just be. And you're sharing it with me." Clara was touched by the gesture, understanding instinctively that this place was special to him. "Seemed right," he said simply. They dismounted and let the horses drink from the pool while they spread a blanket in a shady spot for their picnic. Clara had outdone herself with the food, packing fried chicken, biscuits, pickled vegetables, and a special apple pie she had baked the previous evening. "This is a feast," Archer remarked appreciatively as Clara arranged the food. "You didn't have to go to such trouble." "I wanted to," she replied with a smile. "Consider it thanks for all the riding lessons." They ate companionably, the conversation flowing easily between them as it always did when they were alone together. Clara found herself studying Archer when he wasn't looking the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his brown hair, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the strong, capable hands that could be so gentle when helping her mount or dismount. After they had eaten their fill, Archer suggested showing her the source of the waterfall higher up the canyon wall. A narrow path, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, wound up the side of the canyon. "It's not dangerous," he assured her, seeing her hesitation. "Just stay close to the wall and follow me." The climb was invigorating rather than frightening, with Archer checking frequently to ensure Clara was managing well. When they reached a shelf of rock about halfway up the canyon wall, he offered his hand to help her onto the level surface. "Worth the climb, isn't it?" he asked, gesturing to the view. Clara gazed out over the canyon, stunned by the panorama below and the vast expanse of sky above. "It's like being suspended between heaven and earth," she murmured. "That's exactly how I've always thought of it," Archer said, sounding pleased that she understood. They sat side by side on the rock shelf, legs dangling over the edge, comfortable in each other's presence. Clara was struck by how far she had come from the proper Boston governess, who would have considered such a position scandalously improper. "Penny for your thoughts," Archer said after a while. Clara smiled at the expression. "I was just thinking about how much I've changed since coming west. The woman I was in Boston would hardly recognize me now." "Is that good or bad?" "Good," Clara said without hesitation. "I feel more alive here, more myself somehow. Does that sound strange?" Archer shook his head. "Not strange at all. The West has a way of stripping away pretense. You can't hide behind social niceties when you're facing a blizzard or learning to ride. Or being abandoned by a stagecoach," Clara added wryly. Archer's expression darkened slightly. "Have you heard anything more about Mercer?" "Sheriff Wilson mentioned he's been released from jail, but lost his position with the stage line. Apparently, the company was not pleased to learn he'd been lightening the load by abandoning passengers." "Good," Archer said firmly. "Man like that has no business being responsible for others." They fell silent again, watching an eagle soar on thermals above the canyon. Clara was acutely aware of Archer beside her, the warmth of his arm against hers, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Clara," he said suddenly, his voice lower than usual, "there's something I've been wanting to say." She turned to him, her heart accelerating at his serious tone. "Yes," Archer seemed to struggle with his words, uncharacteristically hesitant. "These past weeks, riding with you, talking with you, they've been the best I can remember in a long time." "For me as well," Clara admitted softly. "I'm not good at this," he continued, frustration evident in his voice. "Never have been, but I need you to know that I care for you more than I expected to, more than might be wise." Clara felt a surge of emotion at his halting confession. "Why wouldn't it be wise to care?" "Because I'm not the kind of man someone like you should set your heart on," Archer replied, his gaze fixed on the canyon below. "I'm a solitary rancher with nightmares from a war fought 20 years ago. You're educated, refined. You deserve better. Shouldn't that be for me to decide?" Clara asked gently. Archer finally looked at her, vulnerability evident in his eyes. "Is it your decision?" Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Yes, and I've decided that I care for you too, Archer, very much." For a moment, he seemed unable to process her words. Then slowly, he reached out to touch her cheek, his fingers calloused but infinitely gentle. "Clara." She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken emotion. Then, with exquisite slowness, Archer leaned forward and kissed her. The kiss was tentative at first, as if he feared she might pull away. When she responded, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, the kiss deepened, becoming something both tender and passionate. Clara felt as though she were falling and flying simultaneously, her heart soaring with newfound joy. When they finally parted, Archer rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I've wanted to do that since the welcome dinner," he admitted. Clara smiled, her own pulse racing. "Why did you wait so long? Wasn't sure you felt the same, wasn't sure I had the right to ask." "You didn't need to ask," Clara whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "And I do feel the same, more than I can say." They remained on the rock shelf for a long time, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, sometimes exchanging sweet, exploratory kisses that left Clara breathless. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon when Archer reluctantly suggested they should start back. "Mrs. Abernathy will have the sheriff out looking for you if we're not back by dark," he said, helping Clara to her feet. The climb down and the ride back to Superior passed in a golden haze for Clara. Something fundamental had shifted between them, barriers falling away to reveal a deeper connection than either had anticipated. As they approached town in the gathering dusk, Archer reached over to take her hand, squeezing it gently. "May I call on you properly?" He asked, a touch of old-fashioned formality in his tone. "I'd like to do this right." Clara squeezed his hand in return. "I'd like that very much." When they arrived at Mrs. Abernathy's house, the older woman was waiting on the porch, a knowing glint in her eye as she observed their clasped hands and Clara's radiant expression. "Had a pleasant day, did you?" she inquired innocently. "The most pleasant," Clara replied, unable to contain her happiness. "Archer showed me the most beautiful canyon. Among other things, I'd wager," Mrs. Abernathy murmured, earning a blush from Clara and a rare, genuine laugh from Archer. "Mrs. Abernathy," he said, tipping his hat, "I'd like your permission to call on Miss Nielsen." "Properly, with your chaperoning as needed." The older woman's expression softened. "It's about time, Mr. James. You have my blessing for whatever that's worth." Archer helped Clara dismount, his hands lingering at her waist. "I'll come by on Wednesday evening if that suits." "It suits perfectly," Clara replied, reluctant to let him go. As Archer rode away, leading Penny behind him, Clara couldn't help the smile that seemed permanently fixed on her face. Mrs. Abernathy ushered her inside, immediately demanding every detail of their day together. "I knew from the moment he brought you in from that blizzard," she declared as Clara recounted the events of the day, tactfully omitting some of the more personal moments. "The way he looked at you like you were something precious he'd found unexpectedly. Was it really so obvious?" Clara asked, somewhat mortified at the thought that her growing feelings had been transparent to everyone but herself. "To those with eyes to see," Mrs. Abernathy confirmed. "Though I must say, I've never seen Archer James look at anyone the way he looks at you. That man has kept himself apart from this town for 8 years. Then you arrive and suddenly he's attending dinners and offering riding lessons." Clara considered this. "He's been hurt before. The war, he says, though I think perhaps there's more to it." "Most likely," Mrs. Abernathy agreed. "Men who seek solitude usually have their reasons, but whatever ghosts haunt him, you seem to bring him peace. That's a rare gift, Clara." That night, as Clara prepared for bed, she found herself replaying the day in her mind, the hidden canyon, their conversation on the rock shelf, Archer's halting confession of feelings, and most vividly, their first kiss. It felt like the beginning of something profound, a turning point in her life as significant as her decision to leave Boston for the western frontier. Archer, too, found himself reflecting on the day's events as he rode home in the gathering darkness. He had not planned to reveal his feelings so directly, had in fact been wrestling with them for weeks, unsure whether he had anything worthwhile to offer a woman like Clara. Yet in that moment on the rock shelf, looking at her silhouetted against the sky, he had been unable to contain the truth any longer. Now, with the memory of her kisses still fresh on his lips and the knowledge that his feelings were returned, Archer felt something he had not experienced in decades' hope. Not just for momentary happiness, but for a future brighter than the solitary existence he had resigned himself to after the war. As promised, Archer called on Clara the following Wednesday evening, arriving at Mrs. Abernathy's house with his hat in his hands and a small bouquet of wildflowers. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance, wearing a new shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed. Mrs. Abernathy welcomed him with barely concealed amusement, calling for Clara, who appeared moments later, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "These are for you," Archer said, offering the flowers somewhat self-consciously. "Found them growing near the creek, reminded me of your eyes." Clara accepted the bouquet with delight. "They're beautiful, thank you." They spent the evening on Mrs. Abernathy's porch, the older woman ostensibly chaperoning while actually giving them considerable privacy by repeatedly finding reasons to check on something inside the house. Their conversation was easy, punctuated by lingering glances and occasional touches when their hands would meet. "The children asked about you today," Clara mentioned as twilight descended. "They wanted to know if Mr. James would be coming to visit the school again." Archer raised an eyebrow. "Again? I've never visited your school." "I know," Clara replied with a smile. "But they've heard so much about you, the brave rancher who rescued their teacher from the blizzard, that they feel as though they know you." "They exaggerate my part," Archer said modestly. Anyone would have followed those tracks. But not anyone did, Clara pointed out softly. You did. Archer's expression grew serious. And I thank God every day that I noticed those tracks. Can't imagine my life now if I hadn't. Clara reached out to touch his hand. Nor can I. The courtship progressed steadily over the summer months. Archer became a familiar figure in Superior, no longer the reclusive rancher but a man with purpose and connection. He visited Clara at the school, charming her students with his knowledge of local wildlife and history. He escorted her to church on Sundays, joined her for dinner at Mrs. Abernathy's several evenings a week, and continued their riding excursions on weekends. As summer waned and the first hints of autumn touched the landscape, Archer invited Clara to visit his ranch for the first time. Mrs. Abernathy, ever conscious of propriety but also supportive of their relationship, agreed to accompany them as chaperone. Though why a woman my age needs to ride all that way just so you two can make eyes at each other over fence posts is beyond me, she grumbled good-naturedly, as Archer helped her into the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion. The ranch, when they arrived, proved more substantial than Clara had imagined from Archer's modest descriptions. The cabin was small but well-built and meticulously maintained. A barn, corral, chicken coop, and various outbuildings formed a tidy compound. Fields of hay stretched beyond, with grazing land for his small herd of cattle beyond that. It's not much, Archer said as he helped Clara down from the wagon, but it's mine, built most of it with my own hands. It's wonderful, Clara replied sincerely, looking around with genuine appreciation. A true home. Archer gave her a tour while Mrs. Abernathy settled herself comfortably on the porch with a glass of lemonade. He showed Clara the barn where Thunder and Penny had their stalls, the chicken coop where a dozen hens provided eggs, the vegetable garden that supplied much of his food. You're entirely self-sufficient, Clara observed, impressed. Nearly, Archer agreed. Still need flour, sugar, coffee, the basics, but I grow or raise most of what I need. Inside the cabin, Clara was struck by the surprising touches of comfort and civilization shelves lined with books, a fine chess set displayed on a small table, curtains at the windows, even a small piano in one corner. You play? She asked, surprised. Archer looked almost embarrassed. Not well. Bought it from a family heading back east a few years ago. Thought it might be nice to have music in the house. Mostly it sits quiet. Clara sat on the bench and ran her fingers over the keys. May I? At his nod, she began to play a simple melody, one her mother had taught her years ago. The piano was somewhat out of tune but still serviceable. As the music filled the small cabin, Clara glanced up to find Archer watching her with an expression of such tender regard that it made her heart ache. The house has been waiting for that, he said quietly when she finished. For music. For life, the implication of his words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Clara rose from the piano bench and moved to him, reaching up to touch his face gently. It's a lovely home, Archer. Anyone would be fortunate to share it with you. His hand covered hers against his cheek. There's only one person I want to share it with, Clara. They might have kissed then had Mrs. Abernathy not chosen that moment to call from the porch, inquiring if they intended to provide lunch or if she should begin the long walk back to town. Archer laughed, the tension breaking, and they rejoined the older woman for the picnic Clara had prepared. As they ate, Archer spoke more about his plans for the ranch, expanding the cattle herd, building a larger barn, perhaps adding a second story to the cabin someday. Clara listened, increasingly certain that she was meant to feature in these someday plans. That evening, after they had returned to Superior and seen Mrs. Abernathy safely home, Archer walked Clara to the schoolhouse where she needed to prepare materials for the next day's lessons. In the privacy of the empty building, he finally gave voice to what had been building between them all day. Clara, he said, taking both her hands in his, I brought you to the ranch today for a reason. I wanted you to see it, to know what kind of life I could offer you. He paused, gathering his courage. It's not a grand life, not like what you might have had in Boston, but it would be a good life, I think, a happy one if you were willing to share it. Clara's heart soared at his words, though she maintained her composure. Are you asking me something, Archer? He nodded, his expression earnest. I'm asking if you could see yourself there with me, as my wife." The last word seemed to hang in the air between them. Clara felt tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "I could," she whispered. "I do. Every day since the canyon, I've thought of little else." Relief and joy transformed Archer's face. "Then you'll marry me." "Yes," Clara said, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I will marry you, Archer James." He pulled her into his arms then, kissing her with a passion that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. Clara responded in kind, her arms circling his neck, her heart full to bursting with love and happiness. When they finally parted, Archer pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Clara Nielsen. Have since I found your tracks in that blizzard, I think, and I love you," she replied, the words coming easily, naturally. "My rescuer, my teacher, my heart." The news of their engagement spread through Superior like wildfire, met with general approval and not a little smugness from those who claimed to have predicted it from the start. Mrs. Abernathy, in particular, was insufferably pleased with herself. "Knew at the moment he carried you through my door half frozen," she declared. "Never seen a man look so terrified and determined all at once." Plans for the wedding proceeded swiftly. Clara and Archer agreed on a date in late October, after the harvest, but before the winter snows made travel difficult. The ceremony would be held in Superior's small church, with a celebration afterward at the town hall. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Archer worked tirelessly to prepare the ranch for his bride. With help from friends in Superior, he added a second room to the cabin, a proper bedroom, to replace the curtained-off sleeping area. He built new furniture, repainted the interior, and even constructed a covered walkway between the house and the chicken coop so Clara wouldn't have to trudge through snow in winter. Clara, meanwhile, continued teaching while also preparing for her new life. The school board, upon hearing of her engagement, had initially assumed she would resign her position. Clara had firmly corrected this assumption. "I intend to continue teaching," she informed them at their September meeting. "Mr. James fully supports this decision, and we have discussed arrangements to make it possible." The arrangement in question involved Archer purchasing a second wagon specifically for Clara's use, allowing her to drive to and from the school on days when he couldn't accompany her. It would mean early mornings and sometimes challenging travel in poor weather, but Clara was determined to maintain her independence and professional identity even as she embraced her new role as a rancher's wife. As the wedding day approached, Clara received an unexpected letter from Boston, her former employer, the Whitfield family, expressing shock at her hasty decision to marry a frontier savage and offering to pay her passage back east before you make an irreparable mistake. Clara's response was polite but firm, informing them that she had found both professional fulfillment and personal happiness in the West, and that her fiancé was the finest man she had ever known. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, with just enough autumn chill in the air to redden cheeks, but not enough to cause discomfort. Clara prepared in Mrs. Abernathy's house, assisted by several women from town who had become friends over the past months. Her wedding dress was simple but elegant cream-colored silk with delicate lace trim, ordered from a dressmaker in Phoenix. Her chestnut hair was arranged in a sophisticated updo adorned with small white flowers, and around her neck hung a pearl pendant that had belonged to her mother. "You look radiant," Mrs. Abernathy declared, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Absolutely radiant." When it was time, Clara walked to the church on Mrs. Abernathy's arm, the older woman having volunteered to give her away in the absence of family. The small building was filled to capacity, with every resident of Superior in attendance along with ranchers and miners from the surrounding area. Archer waited at the altar, looking both nervous and jubilant in a new black suit. As Clara walked toward him, his expression transformed into one of such pure adoration that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices steady and sincere. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Archer's kiss was tender but restrained, mindful of their audience. The celebration afterward was anything but restrained. The town hall had been decorated with autumn flowers and leaves, tables laden with food contributed by every household in Superior. Music, dancing, and laughter filled the space as the community celebrated not just a marriage, but the completion of a story they had all witnessed from its dramatic beginning. "Happy, Mrs. James," Archer murmured in Clara's ear as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "Completely," she assured him, her eyes shining with joy. "And you, Mr. James," his answer was in his smile, in the way he held her close, in the promise of his kiss. "More than I ever thought possible." As darkness fell, they departed amid cheers and well wishes, traveling by wagon to the ranch that was now their shared home. Archer had insisted on carrying Clara over the threshold, a gesture that made her laugh with delight. "Welcome home," he said softly as he set her down in the cabin, now transformed by their combined efforts into a true sanctuary. Clara looked around at the space that would be their life together, the piano now tuned and positioned near the hearth, her books intermingled with his on the shelves, touches of femininity softening the masculine simplicity. It was everything she had ever wanted without knowing she wanted it. "Home," she echoed, turning to embrace her husband. "Our home." The years that followed were not without challenges. Winter storms, summer droughts, illness, and occasional financial hardship tested their resilience. Yet through it all, their love remained steadfast, deepening with each obstacle overcome, each joy shared. Clara continued teaching, driving herself to and from Superior most days, though Archer often insisted on accompanying her during harsh weather. Her dedication earned the respect of the community, and the school thrived under her guidance. When a proper schoolhouse was finally built in Superior in 1889, Clara was instrumental in its design and celebrated as the driving force behind educational advancement in the region. Archer expanded his ranch operations, gradually building a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. The solitary, reclusive man who had once avoided town gatherings became known as a leader in the community, serving on committees and lending his strength and skills whenever needed. The nightmares that had once plagued him diminished, though never disappeared entirely. On the rare nights when they returned, Clara would hold him close, her presence a balm to wounds decades old. In the spring of 1887, their family grew with the birth of a son, Thomas James, a robust baby with his father's eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, they welcomed twin daughters, Emily and Sarah, whose arrival nearly coincided with a blizzard not unlike the one that had first brought their parents together. "History repeating itself," Archer had remarked as he paced anxiously while the midwife attended to Clara. Though this time, thankfully, everyone's safely indoors. As the children grew, the ranch expanded to accommodate their needs. Archer added more rooms to the cabin, eventually transforming it into a proper farmhouse with separate bedrooms for the children, a dedicated study for Clara's teaching preparations, and a wide, covered porch where the family gathered on summer evenings. Clara taught all 3 children at home until they were old enough to attend school in Superior, instilling in them a love of learning and respect for both book knowledge and practical skills. Under their father's guidance, they learned ranching, riding, and survival techniques. Under their mothers, they studied literature, science, and music. By the turn of the century, with their children nearly grown, Clara and Archer had established themselves as pillars of the community. Their ranch, now known as Blizzard Creek Ranch in commemoration of their first meeting, had become one of the most prosperous in the region. Their home was a gathering place for friends, neighbors, and travelers passing through, always open, always welcoming. On the 15th anniversary of their wedding, Archer surprised Clara with a special gift, a small brass telescope, similar to one her father had used in his naturalist expeditions. "For stargazing," he explained as she unwrapped it with delight. "Thought we might make our own catalog, like your father did with birds, only we'll document the night sky." The gesture touched Clara deeply, this acknowledgement of her heritage and interests woven seamlessly into their shared life. That night, they sat together on the porch, the telescope positioned on a tripod Archer had crafted, mapping constellations while their children played a spirited game of cards inside. "Did you ever imagine this?" Clara asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "That day when you found my tracks in the snow, did you ever imagine we'd be here like this?" Archer's arm tightened around her. "No," he admitted honestly. "I was just trying to save a stranger, didn't know I was really saving myself." Clara turned to face him, noting how the years had added silver to his hair and lines around his eyes, but had done nothing to diminish the strength and warmth in his gaze. "We saved each other, I think." "Still saving me every day," Archer murmured, drawing her close for a kiss as tender and meaningful as their first had been all those years ago. In later years, as their children established lives of their own, Thomas taking over the main operations of the ranch, Emily becoming a teacher like her mother, Sarah pursuing medicine in Phoenix, Clara and Archer found new pleasure in quieter pursuits. They traveled occasionally, visiting places Clara had read about but never seen. They welcomed grandchildren, introducing them to the joys of ranch life and the wonders of nature. And sometimes, on winter evenings when snow fell softly outside their windows, they would reminisce about that fateful blizzard of 1885, how close they had come to never meeting, how fortunate they had been in their timing and circumstances. "Providence," Archer would say, his voice gruff with emotion. No other explanation for it. Clara would always smile and take his hand, her eyes reflecting the same love and gratitude that had sustained them through decades together. Providence indeed. And one very observant cowboy who noticed tracks in the snow. On their 50th wedding anniversary, with family gathered from near and far to celebrate, Archer raised a toast that brought tears to every eye. To frozen tracks that led to warm hearts, and the woman brave enough to follow her dreams into a blizzard. "Every step I've taken with you, Clara, has been the greatest privilege of my life." And Clara, her hand steady in his after half a century of partnership, replied simply, "And every step yet to come, my love, every step yet to come."